Greetings, ICC fans. I'm your host, Joel Benjamin, and you are listening to Game of the Week. The World Junior Championship is no longer able to attract all the best young players in the world. Stars like Magnus Carlsen and Sergei Karyakin, to name a couple, are already on to bigger and better things. Even so, it's pretty impressive to boast of a fistful of 2,600 players. I can remember when only a few players in the world could attain that level. In such an environment, a player rated 2494 can be considered a dark horse, especially when 2007 champion Ahmed Adly comes from Egypt. Though much improved, Egypt would not be considered a traditional chess power or even a current one. Adly had an amazing tournament where he seemed not to know the meaning of the word draw. He ignored a first-round loss to an opponent rated over 200 points below him and won 7 games in a row. He lost the next 2 games, and that would have been enough to finish most players. But Adly shrugged it off and won his last 3 to take clear first place with 10 out of 13. Adly mixed up his openings a bit to keep his opponents off balance. With white, he showed a preference for 1d4 and flank openings. In round 8, he opted for 1e4 against Czech Grandmaster Adly-Laznicka, a player I have to say I've never heard of, though he sports a lofty rating of 2610. The e4 was just a tease, as Adly maneuvered into a flank opening. After some risky play by Laznicka, he missed an important defensive opportunity, and then Adly was able to sacrifice for an aesthetic finish. Let's take a look. This week's game, we have Ahmed Adly white, Adly-Laznicka black. Adly opened with e4, and the game starts out as a Sicilian. But after e6, white shifts gears with d3. And if you're a Sicilian player with 2 e6 in your repertoire, you have to be very prepared for this switch into a King's Indian attack, because it's much more effective when black has committed to e6. If black wants to go for a kingside fianchetto, he has to be careful for certain possibilities. For instance, if he plays knight c6, g3, g6, white could play d4, trying to switch into an open Sicilian where black could have some weaknesses on the dark squares. Or perhaps instead the move bishop g5 is also slightly unpleasant. After the move d5, knight b d2, this move by Adly is actually not played very much anymore. It's the traditional move, but queen e2 has pretty much replaced knight b d2 in the King's Indian attack. And I think the main reason is that after knight b d2, black has a very reliable line in bishop d6 and knight ge7. And I think that white doesn't really have much chance at all to get an advantage against this setup. It's very flexible, and it deals well with any advance by white in the king side, on the king side, or in the center. That's why queen e2 is very popular, because the move bishop d6 is simply not playable. E takes d5 just takes off a pawn for nothing. And then black has to go for a different strategy. If, for instance, black plays knight f6 akin to the game could continue in this fashion. And after playing e5 to chase the knight, white could play c4, and then the knight can come out to a more active square on c3, than it might have on d2. But Laznicka instead played knight f6, and it should be noted that this position that started as a Sicilian is now more correctly identified as a French defense. Certainly it could come out of e4, e6, d3 on move 2. And if Laznicka is not experienced in the French defense, he may not know this position as well. But anyway, knight f6 is, of course, an important move. Bishop g2, bishop e7, castles. And now, in this position, in the old days, black would just sort of routinely castle. But nowadays, black tends to avoid the early castling. After castles, white could play e5, knight d7. Actually, knight e8 is in this position is probably more accurate because black doesn't have that much pressure on the e5 pawn anyway. Black goes for queenside attack, and white goes for a kingside attack, knight f1, idea h4, knight on 1 to h2, and knight g4, so forth, those various ideas. In his young days, Bobby Fischer used to win a lot of games, a lot of instructive games on the white side of the King's Indian attack. And after a while, black players decided that maybe it was a good idea not to castle into this attack. So b6, a different strategy for black. Rook e1, bishop b7. Now to e5, as white doesn't really have an alternate plan to this move. Knight d7. Now an idea for black is that rather than castling kingside, he may look to advance the pawns on the kingside with g5, and in the process try to undermine the defense of the pawn on e5. Therefore, one of the major moves here for white is h4, and that's actually a more common move than the one that Adly plays here. And the game could continue queen c7, queen e2, defend the pawn, castles, knight f1. And white has this idea that if black tries to play h6 and g5, that he'll be in position to blockade this pawn on g5 with knight g4 and keep the king side from getting too out of control. We'd have a very double-edged position there. Instead of the move h4, Adly instead went for c4, directly attacking in the center. Certainly a move that's been played a number of times, though it's less popular than h4. Black has many replies that he could consider. Certainly, simply castling is possible. In this situation, white has committed himself in the center. The center can be open so that wing attack is not as dangerous. Probably there's no reason why black should feel he has to delay kingside castling. Another interesting possibility is to go for the immediate maneuver knight f8, and certainly if white exchanges on d5, then we'll see that this knight has a square to go to e6, nice blockading square in the center. I think the move that's been played the most often here is d4, but I don't think that that's really the best move. I think it's just the move that most people play, maybe not necessarily international masters and grandmasters. In this case, if white continues knight e4, black might very well just take that pawn on e5. And after an exchange, knight takes c5, uncovering attack on the knight. Bishop g2, king g2, b takes c5, rook takes e5. The position's been simplified a bit, and it's probably roughly equal. I think more promising for white is to maintain the defense of that e5 pawn and instead play h4. We could have a continuation like this: queen c7, queen e2, castles, knight f1, h6, knight on1 to h2, and white is ready to meet that advance on the king side, as I discussed before, and also he has a ready-made lever on the queen side with a3 and b4 after fixing these queenside pawns, and that will ensure that he'll create some open lines over there. So I don't think this is really the best way for black to continue. The move played by Laznicka, queen c7, certainly looks reasonable. And Adly continued, c takes d5, e takes d5, and now d4. This seems to be a new move. In this position, there are a few known moves. e6 is one of them. After f takes e6, rook takes e6, castles, knight f1, bishop to d6, covering up against bishop f4, and knight is going to come to f6. Seems like black has a fairly comfortable position here. But I thought that maybe instead of knight to f1, a very interesting move here is knight to c4, which I admit that my German friend Fritz helped me find. The idea is that the d takes c4, bishop f4, and black will have to give back the piece to save his queen. And this might create some advantage for white, this move, this slick move, knight c4. So after e6, instead of e6, white can also try knight f1. And here, again, Fritz, the materialist, says, what about taking this pawn on e5? And produces this interesting line: bishop f4, f6, d4, trade, queen takes d4, castles. And now white can not only get back the pawn, can also grab an extra pawn. And as we play this line through, bishop d5, queen takes d5, bishop c5, knight e3, rook a d8. And as we get to the end of this line, black has sufficient compensation for the pawn. The rook is going to penetrate to d2, and black's doing fine. So that was one possible continuation if white had not defended that pawn on e5, but instead he went d4. And now Laznicka plays a bit of a controversial move, knight to f8. Logically enough, maneuvering the knight to this blockading square in e6, but of course he hasn't castled yet. So anytime you make a move which not only doesn't castle, but puts you another move away from castling, there's always a possibility that something can happen before you get there. Instead of knight f8, just a simple castles looks perfectly okay. For instance, knight f1, c takes d4, bishop f4, knight c5, and black looks to have about an equal game. The knight maybe will come to that e6 square. Black will have an isolated d5 pawn, but the pawn will not exactly be that well blockaded. It will also be a passed pawn, and it seems that both sides have pretty good play in this situation. Instead, knight f8, a riskier move. Knight f1, knight e6, d takes c5, and Laznicka opts for a hanging pawns formation, very aggressive in the center with b takes c5, and then knight e3, attacking that pawn on d5. Now, black could try to defend with rook d8 using some tactics. Knight takes d5, rook takes d5, queen takes d5, knight c to d4. It's possible that he was concerned about a queen sacrifice, queen b7, knight takes d4, which perhaps gives white maybe a small edge, hard to say, with two pieces and a pawn for a queen. Bishop c6 check on the next move could take away the castling privilege. Hard to say if he was concerned about that possibility or not. But Laznicka played d4, and now the pawn duo in the center is broken. Knight hops into d5, queen d7, knight d2 defending, knight to b4. Again, black is delaying castling. Knight takes e7. And now if black plays simply queen takes e7, knight e4, white has good prospects for a kingside attack. Indeed, the move knight f6 check is certainly in the air. If black, for instance, castles, he might well be walking into that move. So Laznicka threw in bishop takes g2, and then Adly mixes it up with knight f5. Bishop d5, knight e4. Those knights are now very aggressively posted in the center of the board. King f8. Well, it seems that the time for castling may have come and gone for black. And that is a danger when you delay castling. Very often you'll have a position and say, well, I don't have to castle, I can do this first, maneuver these pieces around. And then when the time comes, when it's now or never, it ends up being never. In this position, if black castles, this move looks pretty dangerous. For instance, white can play knight takes g7 straight off. And now, very, very dangerous to take that knight. Knight takes knight is out because knight f6 check wins the queen. King takes knight, knight f6. Queen b5. This move is pretty much forced to try to sneak into d3 and defend the h7 pawn that way. But even so, it doesn't look like it's going to save black. Queen g4 check, king h8. Now white can simply attack this knight on b4. If the knight moves, let's say goes here, then he has no way to defend his kingside. The threat to h7 is decisive. So black would basically have to pitch that knight on b4 while we get his piece back and still maintain a very strong attack. From that line again, after castles, knight takes g7, bishop takes e4 would be the best that black could do. And now knight h5 is a tempting move, but it actually does not work after f5. which actually defends against both of white's threats and leads to a black advantage. But instead of knight h5, simply knight takes e6. And white has won a pawn and created a gash in black's king side. So instead of castling, the move king f8 was played. a3 kicking back the knight, knight c6, queen h5. This is a very interesting move. And it's actually branded as an error by our ever capricious Fritz. And in fact, it's a little bit of a miscalculation. But we should be thankful for this miscalculation, because if white had not played this move, we would not have seen the beautiful finish that we did in the game. Objectively stronger move seems to be knight e to d6, occupying that outpost square and keeping the strong position in the center. Black is bottled up with his rooks unconnected, and that leaves white with a better position. But understandably, Adly didn't really want to play knight d6 because he had all these ideas of sacrificing the knight by going to f6. And so he plays queen h5, and now Laznicka missed a very important opportunity to turn the game right around, as very often happens in a lot of very decisive games. It kind of reminds me slightly of the Christensen-Wolf game that we looked at recently, where Wolf had really kind of one chance to stay in the game after the attack began, and after that it was over. Here, Laznicka has an opportunity, and it's actually not that complicated, but he needed to remove this knight on e4 with bishop takes e4. And perhaps defense is a lost art among our youth. They all want to attack and win games with whatever color they have. But it's sound chess to remove that attacking piece. And after rook takes e4, g6 actually creates some problems for white. White could sidestep the fork with queen h6 check, but after king g8, if the knight should hop into d6, black has the resource knight takes e5. And it seems that after this move, black actually has the advantage. So it is that games can turn around very quickly, even the games with beautiful attacks. If you stop to analyze them carefully, move by move, there's very often a missed opportunity. In the days of the computers, all this is known to us now. In the old days, these games would be presented as a fait accompli, as if it was ordained that the white attack would carry through. Now we know to look very carefully every move, that these resources very often pop up. But unfortunately for Laznicka, he did not avail himself of this defensive resource and instead played d3. A bold, aggressive move. He's looking to hop into d4 with his knight, and he doesn't want to trade this very nice bishop on d5 because he's thinking about this weak square at f3. Keep in mind that white has given up his light squared bishop, and thus there are weaknesses on the king side. So d3, a very ambitious move. Unfortunately, it's a losing move because the knight f6 sacrifice is just crushing. Black takes, queen h6 check, king e8, e takes f6. And now black is in all kinds of trouble. Queen g7 mate is covered for the moment, but it means that this knight on e6 is stuck. And white has moves like rook takes e6, very much in the air. And this is going to be a big problem for black. Now, black wants to play, for instance, an active move like knight to d4, which also reinforces the defense of his knight on e6. There is a problem, though, that knight e7 check would force black to give up his queen. So black defends that e7 square, and now you could say perhaps has a threat to play knight to d4. But the problem is that white is just a little bit too quick with the attack, and it's a little bit understandable that Laznicka would overlook that just how strong the attack is, although I don't think I'd really want to let my king get boxed in like this. And not surprisingly, white has a very, very strong move, bishop f4. And just so happens that this bishop is moving into position to take away black's important squares from the black king and set up all kinds of mates. Now, if black tries knight cd4, perhaps he was counting on this move, white simply takes off that knight. And that leaves black without a good move. The knight can't recapture because of the mate on g7. And if c takes d4, white plays rook takes e6, pawn takes e6, queen g5 check, king f8, and here's the kicker. Bishop d6 check. That's why the bishop f4 move set everything up. The bishop cannot be taken because of queen g7, mate on the move. And after rook e7, queen g7 check, well, black is losing all his pieces, but actually white's not going to even take them because he's going to get a checkmate. And that finishes off the game. So we go back to the position after the star move bishop f4, and black is in pretty much a desperate way. He actually moved the rook away, rook to c8. Obviously, that's a bad sign when you play rook e8 and then rook c8. But black doesn't have to worry about it for too much longer. Bishop d6, and this just sets everything up by covering the f8 square. Knight cd4. At this point, black is happy for an opportunity to sacrifice his queen after knight e7 check, queen takes, and hope for some counterplay down here. But at this point, white has something much better. No reason to go for the queen when you can go for the king. It just has to choose which move he finds most aesthetic. Because here, queen f8 check does the job. Mate. What's more, queen g5 check. Mate. And finally, the move that Adly played, queen g7 check, and resignation occurred because knight takes g7, knight h6 is checkmate. So very nice little queen sacrifice to finish up with the checkmate set up by the sacrifice on move 23, well calculated by white. And in this game, the player of the black pieces, Victor Laznicka, seemed just a bit too optimistic on some moves, missed his chances for defense. And with this game, Ahmed Adly put himself into first place in the World Junior, although it was the stretch run of those last 3 games that he won. 13 games, not a single draw. Very impressive for the the young Egyptian player who now will have a lot to look forward to. Certainly, this will create some opportunities for him to play in good tournaments. So there we have it, the new World Junior Champion. And the tournament just concluded recently, and actually in the next show we're going to see what Adly might have to look forward to as World Junior Champion with last year's World Junior Champion. But you'll just have to tune into next week's show to see what that's all about. In the meantime, I hope that you all enjoyed this game. Thanks for listening to Game of the Week. I'm Joel Benjamin, and I look forward to next time. Take care, everybody.